question.
Well, Esther, we'd like to start by asking you, how did your brother Walt torture you when you were kids together?
Two incidents I can think of real quick. We had a sand pile, and luckily Mom planted it quite a distance from the house. I mean, it wasn't right outside the house, it was at the back of the garden. And we would make these wonderful farms with the deep ditches on the side, you know, and like we saw around us. So what happened was the boys decided it had to rain every once in a while. So we had these tin cans with nail holes in them. But they weren't content to just let it rain on their property. They did it on ours, and we really got into it. We learned to be very verbal. we couldn't handle them physically, you know. I think about it now, it's funny, but we were angry.
Because the rain would destroy what you'd created?
Yeah, they made sure it rained on our stuff and ruined everything. That was realistic, you know. Isn't that funny? The other thing is, what was it with Walt? He sat behind me in grade school. We were a small country school. He sat behind me and he'd pull my hair or he'd bother me and I would reach back, you know. And I said, I hope the teacher paddles you, you know. They still believed in paddling back then. Lo and behold, one day he did, and I felt so sorry for my brother. I never wished that on him again.
Could you what was the school like?
What was the elementary school like? It was a quarter mile from home. It was a 2-story brick house because we were in oil country. You know, the different townships had their schools, taxation and all, I suppose. And the total school, they were 8th grade. The first 4 years, they were all taught by males. The last 4 years, they were all taught by females. I don't know how the transition came along at that time. And we had all the grade. We could hear all the recitations and stuff. I mean, you learned a lot just by observing and listening to other classmates. We had chalkboards all along the walls and did math and spellings and stuff on everything. And the curriculum was mainly reading and writing, geography, Kansas history, maybe world history, stuff like that.
When you say you were in oil country and so it was 2 stories, so was that because it was
the township could pay for it?
So you actually, the oil brought wealth to have it be 2 stories instead of 1?
Actually, there was no oil well near us, but a couple of miles away. But it was still in the area, I guess. It was a wealthy area.
And was it 1 room below and 1 room above?
Yeah. And then there was room for a cloak room, whatever you want to call it. Cloak room, dinner pails, books. Yeah, we packed, at one point, we packed 9 dinner pails. I think that's when Katie was teaching too. And then the high school kids and the grade school kids packed 9 dinner pails.
And what would be in the dinner pails?
Homemade baked stuff, like sandwiches and stuff. We had these little peanut butter jars full of fruit that we'd canned in the summer. And it was really quite wholesome. And then at Christmas time, I remember, we filled our dinner pails with those old pepper nuts, you know, these cookies, the tiny cookies. Only Mom's weren't tiny. She had too many to bake for, you know. And I thought they were flat and all that. And those kids actually envied us, so we'd trade our pepper nuts for their fresh fruit, which we had an orange maybe once a year, Christmas time, you know.
Because that was the only kind of fruit tree. You had all sorts of fruit trees, right? But not orange trees in Kansas.
No orange trees. Pears, apples, peaches. Apricots when they didn't freeze, as they were budding, you know. Apricot tree always makes me think of a bridal outfit. They were beautiful. We had them 2 stories up. We could look out the window and look at the apricot tree. I don't think we harvested many apricots for some reason. Whether they just had bad years or what. We had grapes, several rows, 5 I think, across the garden one way. We had a strawberry bed, rhubarb, asparagus bed, then all the annual plants, you know. I don't know how they did it all. They used their time different than we do now.
What kind of annuals would you plant?
Carrots, peas, potatoes, corn, beets, strawberries, so on. And we canned them in two-quart jars because we were 15. We didn't can peas, you just couldn't keep up with the family size. So whenever I went to my grandmother's place, they already knew what I liked to eat. I always asked for peas and tomatoes because we didn't have those in excess at home.
Do you think that influenced what you preferred throughout your life?
You know, I'm not, the kids can feed me just about anything. I never became very finicky and had little tolerance for people who were. Smart alecky person, wasn't I?
What were the chores that the girls would do versus the boys?
Everything in the house the girls did. The boys helped carry in a lot of the water from the well, which was probably about as far as from here to that post from the house. Maybe not even that far. We'd carry, these buckets would hold 3 gallon, and a strong man could do well to hold 2 of them, one on each arm, you know, and bring it in. Then we had this huge crock on a stand that my mother had made. She had learned some of her skills from Grandpa. They had no brothers. And I lost my thought.
You're bringing in the water.
Hmm?
You're bringing in
Carrying
the
in the water. Of course, we had to carry in bath water, laundry water, daily use water, special. We had one of these old wooden stoves you see in pictures, you know, heated by wood. See, Grandpa lived in timberland, and so we always had access to plenty of wood.
And that's how you heated the house in the winter?
We also had a kerosene stove, a 3-burner, I think, which we heated our sad irons onto iron, because we didn't have electricity there until in the 30s or 40s, 30s. My grandmother had it even harder. She had to go down the creek to carry her water the first couple of years, uphill. But somehow, we didn't change clothes twice a day either. Probably once a week if you get by. Not that we were that. I mean, we were out in the fresh air and sunshine a lot.
So what kinds of jobs would the girls do in the household?
All the washing the dishes, the cooking, the sewing, cleaning. Our Irene and I were in our, I don't think we were in our teens, when we would wet mop the whole upstairs, 4 bedrooms, and these were not small bedrooms. 2 of them were about the size you see nowadays, but one was much bigger. See, that house was built in 2 stages. Once when they first built it, and then they added on after Linda was born, which was in 29. And they were married in 1911.
And so you'd share a room with several of your sisters?
I never had any privacy. If I wanted privacy, I went outside and hoed. I had a cat across my back, you know. She liked it. I guess she liked the jarring motion or something.
And what would you be hoeing? What you'd hoe a field?
What?
You say you'd go out and hoe?
In a garden. Whenever we had guests, you know, you didn't just clean the house. You made sure there were no weeds in the garden, because they always went, as part of their social stuff, they always went through the garden and admired what other people had done. And my grandmother, she even had a flower garden, and about a half a block away from that, she had a vegetable garden, completely different. This is German style, I think. And people, they had you'd been out there where Christine lives, that long lane.
Mm-hmm.
This was in the days in the Model Ts, you know, or maybe even the horse and buggy part of the time. And people came to just see her gardens. Again, she had a big family. She lost half her children. And she got married at 18. I think Grandpa was 32, something like that. I mean, it was a harsh life, but they somehow made do. They were industrious. They had everything manicured outside, just like they did in Germany. Have you ever been to Germany? People saw a weed, they'd probably eye it till it wilted from being stared at. So
You said she lost half her children?
she lost all the boys and 2 girls. They didn't die at birth. I think they died the first year.
Like tuberculosis?
Huh?
Tuberculosis?
I think probably alimentary canal problems. That's what I'm guessing. And for some reason, it seemed like the boys were more frail. Because when the last boy was born, Grandpa said, oh, he probably won't make it either. I think he lived to be 9 months. I must have been right. Grandpa was not a very tall man, but he was very strong. You seen the house. They got those stones from up the hill behind the house and built that house.
That was your mother's parents?
My maternal.
Okay. The harder
But
family.
you know, there was so much that was pleasant. I gotta tell you one story just because I think it's funny. We had outhouses back then. There's advantages and disadvantages. I remember one time when Grandpa was sitting in the outhouse and I was sitting on the other hole, you know. And you're so chummy and friendly, and and we had the door wide open, and the aunts and Grandma were out working in the flower patches and stuff. I can just remember the camaraderie. Yeah,
How old were you?
probably under 10. I'm sure. I always think it's funny that back then what modesty was compared to now. I just can't explain it.
So you were saying before that your grandparents were, really a source of emotional support.
They were for some reason. I think one reason was, of the younger children, maybe Gertrude and Louise on down, half the children, they were blue-eyed or green-eyed or whatever eyed. And in that group there, from the 7 youngest, I was the only one with brown eyes. I was the only one that was a true brunette. Katie was a true brunette and Bruno was a true brunette. The others were versions of different colors, you know. And I remember Grandma just being so, pointing that out to her friends that I was the one with the brown eyes. I think my mother was afraid she'd spoil us if she did anything like that. I think that was the whole thing. I don't think it was laziness or malice or carelessness or anything like that. I just think she thought she'd spoil us, whatever that meant to her. And Grandma at that point didn't care, I guess. I just loved that old couple. I don't remember that any of the other kids had the same relationship. I don't remember. One time we stole swallows out of their nests in the barn. Dumb as I was, I thought I could raise them and take care of them for pets, you know. So I was pretty young. And I had to take them back, and I was so ashamed. Grandpa was such a nature lover. He'd take us kids out to the timber and to tell us what all the tree barks were, you know, for the trees, and also the animal life. I went hunting with him. That's the only connection I had with guns. I went hunting with Grandpa one day. He had an old shotgun that he stored in a homemade cabinet he'd made. it wasn't a fine craft cabinet, but it was really an adequate one for storage. You know, they didn't have closets at that time. I guess they haven't thought of it yet. But I went hunting with him, and he'd shoot these old jackrabbits, and I haven't seen a jackrabbit for 50 years. And he'd use it to supplement his dog food, you know, for the dogs. So it wasn't just out to shoot for the heck of it. He had a purpose. And that's my whole feeling about guns. Until Walt had one when we were on the farm. Again, he used it for hunting. We had a creek running through our farm. First 5 years we lived there. And he would take the dog and go out and hunt. And I guess I must have bragged to him, or he thought I was bragging about handling snakes in science class. So one day he had this snake that hit him across the chest. I don't know if the dog did it or what. The snake hit him across the chest. Anyhow, he came home with a snake tied to the dog. And we were sitting down to eat, and that poor dog was scared. He was a puppy. He was scared to death. I said, Walt, please let him live. He just wanted to see if I would follow through with my bragging, I guess. Finally, I went out there and took that thing off of his. He had even gone over the garden fence with that snake in tow. He was so scared. After that, that dog was not scared of anything. I sicked him onto that snake after I loosed it. It was dead. And he felt really brave. And he even took on a badger. That dog did. And of course, Walt used to go and shoot the badger. Thank goodness he was even-tempered. He didn't shoot a lot of things that he could have. So I'm definitely against guns. I really believe that people who have them are more prone to get shot than the ones that don't. That's just my belief. I can't follow it up with fact. You're going to get more than you bargained for.
So you said you thought your mother was afraid of spoiling you, right? What about your father?
You know, this sounds funny, but most of my relationships with Dad were pretty casual. We sat at the table together. I don't remember him doing any, what you call psychological work with me or anything, or acknowledging it. He was usually so tired at the end of the day, all he wanted was peace and quiet. Well, I have news for him. He should have had fewer children. That would have helped. Well, he came over here alone. This was his life when he got here. His twin sister and her husband, an adopted son, lived in Rio de Janeiro. And she would write these, this was strange about these old Mennonite men that came from Europe. The minute they got married, the wives had to take up the correspondence of their families whom they'd never met. It was just a thing they did. And I remember her, she was always kind of begging, and one of these people that was always kind of negative, you know. That's the only way I knew her, through her letters. Alice got to know her a little better through some correspondence, but I just never knew Aunt Johanna any other. And she was always begging, and Alice was really even critical a few times of the fact that Mom didn't encourage her to come. Well, heck, it was Dad's sister, not hers. If he had wanted her to come, he could have done it. So I have a little compassion for that. And what would she have added to our family? She would probably been middle-aged or in her 60s or something. And if she was as negative as she sometimes sounded, that probably wasn't her whole personality. But if she was that negative, just think what a burden that would have been. Because until Linda was born, we lived in 4 rooms. Can you imagine? 4 rooms from 1911 to 1929.
And how many people in those 4 rooms?
Well, Linda was the last child, so there'd be 15 kids. I don't know where they put us. See, I was 6 when that happened, so I just remember from 6 on. I actually think my view of my parents is that they did as well as anybody could.
Esther, I remember
With what they had.
I remember Walt talking about the dust storms, huge dust storms that would come.
Yeah. blow your nose, there was dust. Yeah.
Could you see them coming on the horizon?
Yeah, huge clouds. It's just they were on the ground rather than the sky. It killed livestock. It did a lot. I think western Kansas was even worse. Well, see, they used to plow the fields. They don't do that anymore. This dust came from Oklahoma or someplace. They probably had some from here too. But then they quit plowing, and I don't know if the disking helped to keep the soil together or what.
What would you do when a dust storm came?
Stay inside if you could. I can't even remember how long they lasted, but I think we went to school in dust storms or came home in them, which was a quarter of a mile.
You had to wear like a wet rag on your face or something.
Huh?
My father described wearing some kind of wet rag.
Probably these big men handkerchiefs. Make a triangle out of it and tie it around your neck like a mask. And if you had asthma and something, it must have been awful, which I guess.
How did you meet your husband?
Well, my husband's Walt father and my father lived in adjacent villages in Russia. And so did Ed Esau, who none of you probably know. Each one came alone. Grandpa Schmidt came through Argentina. My dad came through New York, the Liberty, the island. Ed Esau, I don't know how he came. Well, there were people here that they corresponded with that were from the same church. The church played a big part in people's lives. And they met these girls over here. Uncle Ed Esau married a cousin of my mother's. Dad Schmidt married a woman from, I think she was from Nebraska. They lived part of the time in Oklahoma after they were married, so I get it mixed up. And my dad finally came to the Whitewater community, which was our biggest town close by, and worked for people there. They had nothing. And when they married these women, they lost the women lost their passports. They were no longer citizens.
Wow.
They had to go through all that and become citizens. I didn't know that till just a few years ago. They were non-citizens for a while because they married these foreign boys.
Wow.
Immigrants. Well, the whole church was practically made up of immigrants. Some came from Germany, some from Russia, some from other European countries. And most of them were farmers when they came, excepting the pastor and a few people like that. Maybe some teachers.
Was English your second language?
Whose second language?
Yours.
It was Mom's first language, mine, my first. My dad's first language was German in Russia. So they had the German language in common. Whenever we talked to my dad, we'd revert to the German, But then after we all got through grade school, we all talked. He could understand enough English to carry on a minimal conversation. You have to learn to survive. One thing I think that drew the parents together too was Dad's dependency on Mom because she knew the English and he didn't in the beginning. It's kind of interesting.
So
Now, my grandparents came from Germany, I forget what year, Mom was born in 85. Before that, they came as a family. And where did they find their wives? I guess there were other immigrants. Yeah.
So wait, German was your first language, English your second?
Mine? As a child, I spoke German.
Right.
I can hardly understand it when Andrea Markel says something. I mean, it's different in different people do their pronunciation, even different. If you live on one side of the mountain or another, you know.
So when you first went to school, is when you learned English?
I learned English between September and Christmas. Then I got pretty good at it.
Of what year?
My first year.
Of school?
When I was 6. I thought I could talk English, but I it's my own kind.
So,
But I learned enough that when I only had 2 other people in my grade. I learned enough that by Christmas time I won the prize in the mathematics thing between the 3 of us. I think learning to talk is so important rather than just start out with dissecting a sentence, you know.
What made you want to become a nurse?
For a long time I didn't. I wouldn't be anything but a nurse. I did well in science and in literature when I was in school. The rest I don't remember. Well, I knew some math because I remember having whole blackboards with the semi-annual, what was it, when they do mathematics and business and stuff. I could fill the whole blackboard. I didn't know what I was doing it for, but I just knew how to do it. Why did I become a nurse? I think basically I like people. And the other options, you see, the options are a lot less than they are now. In that area, in the rural area, they were either teachers, secretaries, or nurses. And I knew I was a heck of a secretary. And I decided my senior year. By the way, I stayed home a year between grade school and high school. That's when I decided, okay, I'm going to school. I learned fast on that score because did all the ironing and all the hard work. It must have been nice for my siblings. They didn't have to do that, you know, because I was doing it. I think I was either awfully neurotic or something. I hate to use that word, but I was a mess in some ways, emotionally. Anyway, now where were we? About nursing. I finally decided nursing might be interesting because, you know, we got all these stories from missionaries from Africa and stuff, and I had steeped in that stuff that I wanted to go to Africa to work. Either that or become an airplane stewardess, and you had to have nurses training back then.
Oh.
And my mission feeling was wherever I was. I never went to Africa. I have friends there, but I never went there. And so on. How did I meet Walt? Is that the question you asked?
That was the question before. Yeah, you were saying your father, their fathers, his father and your father.
I get sidetracked.
Well, we
easily.
like your getting sidetracked. It's interesting.
My brother Bruno went to Beatrice, and he became friends with Walt's brother, and brought him home. And I guess he and Gertrude got married when she was 21. And I met Walt then, and I remember we walked from the church campus to the closest Mennonite farm to play our party games. You couldn't do that on the church campus. You'd pollute it. I think that's so funny. And I saw Walt there, and I walked with him that quarter of a mile to that farm. And he hardly said anything, and I think I went like this the whole time. I thought, that country boob, he just doesn't talk. But I met him a few times through the connection between Ernie and Gertrude and families, you know. So then when I was asked to come to Beatrice, to DON the hospital there, the Mennonite hospital, we saw Carol here. She was 2 years old. It was on her second birthday. I had made arrangements, or somebody had, for his dad and me to go out to the farm for the birthday party. And lo and behold, Walt came back from Kansas. We had passed like ships in the night. He went to Kansas and I went to Beatrice. And that day, he made sure he took his dad home first and asked me if I would go on a date with him. That's how we met. And I had just had a broken relationship with someone else a year before, which I broke myself, but it was hard anyway. I mean, he was a good guy. And so, who is that over there? I can't see decent. I can barely see. You're a shadow. Well, let's see. So we started dating. And then first I wasn't going to because I thought we'd have to see each other and all these family gatherings, you know. But I decided, when did that stop me? So I decided we would date. Because he lived right there in Beatrice. And I found him much more interesting than anybody else I'd ever even dreamed of dating, you know. Walt was interested in a lot of things. I think he knew more history than a lot of history teachers just because he loved it. He knew more geography. Have you ever talked to Paul? He remembers stuff that, why do you put that up here in storage, you know? Well, his dad had a lot of stuff in storage. And he was interesting. He was decent. Like, he had a lot of interests. It's just, I was 25 when he proposed. One time, just to be honorary, we were at a party for young married couples. And I said, that's when I proposed to Walt. And he said, you did not. He took that so serious. I don't know, I just remember that. But he was the gentlest person I know, outside of making me separate that dog and the snake and a few other things. He wasn't argumentative. What he did, he could just slide out from under somehow. He avoided most arguments. I remember talking to him about, and I think people couldn't handle it well back in the 40s and so, but when I would talk after I'd been in nursing, I'd talk about death and stuff. I think people were just put off by that, you know, and I thought it was just part of life. And I remember I said, well, I think we should make some plans with the mortuary, you know, insurance or something. He had never even thought of it, and he said, okay. And then we talked about cremation. I was getting high on cremation theory, you know. Most people thought I was just showing off. I think it's a great way to go. Space-wise, whatever. So he didn't have much of an opinion, so I said, well, if you don't tell me, I'll just do what I think is right, and that was okay. I think it'd be kind of nifty to light a little fire just once.
You're a pyro.
Right? You don't have to do. But he went to high school. See, his brothers didn't go to high school. That was crazy too back then. Some people didn't send their kids to high school. I think we were lucky, our big family, that most of us went to high school at least. I had cousins that lived just a couple of miles from town, and they didn't go to high school. And that was not common, but not uncommon either. So.
Can I ask, what was it like when you'd can all those fruits and vegetables in the summer? What
It
was
was a terrific feeling of accomplishment. whole table full of canned fruit, and we had to let it cool, of course, before we carried it down to the cellar and put it on shelves.
What was your job in that process?
A lot of times peeling. See, I had three older sisters, Katie and Gertrude and Louise. So some things I didn't do as much as some others.
So what was their jobs?
Peeling stuff to be cooked in open kettle method. Because we didn't cold pack until I was probably in my teens. I don't think I'm answering your question very well.
So that you'd put the fruit or vegetables in a big pot of boiling water?
Yes, yes. Well, we did have some kind of a cooker. I remember one time with a long tube, reached way down. I never used it. I imagine it was kind of dangerous in a way. And there they packed the food in cold, and then they just heated in that thing till it was sterile. You learn some basic survival things with all that. More ways than one. I am guessing, I don't know this, but I am guessing from what I know afterward that Mom probably built those shelves down in the basement. I know she changed windows when they got broken, which they did. See, they had no brothers. And they took a certain satisfaction out of being efficient. They also thought that if they had had brothers, life would have been so much easier for them and better. So they doted on their cousins who, for some reason, lived. They had another thing regarding to preservation. They had a little house that looked like the outhouses, if you've ever seen an outhouse. It had a rock-lined silo inside, and pulleys up here, and you would hook kettles and stuff on those pulleys and lower them to keep them cool. I have wondered whether part of the cause of death was termination, whatever. Wasn't sterile enough. I don't know.
With your siblings, you mean?
Huh?
You mean your siblings who died, that it might have, some of it?
My uncles and aunts. The ones that died in infancy, practically. Well, one child died post-diphtheria. It attacked her heart, I guess. I used to get very, very sore throats. I think they were strep. I no more kill one with antibiotics. I'm surprised antibiotics still work for me, because I would no more than get over one session, then I'd start another. And they were really painful backaches, and headaches and throat aches. And I remember one time after Walt and I were married, we came to Kansas, and I got one of those sore throats. And I got admitted to Bethel Hospital, and Dr. Allen, who I esteemed very highly, she said she couldn't sleep that night. She thought I had diphtheria. Now, and some of her sisters had diphtheria. I think some of my early siblings did too. It's a vile disease. We just supposed, before vaccination came, and we just weren't aware of stuff. You just endured it. You either died or you lived. And some people back then, I don't know if it was whether it would have happened anyway, or if they did something wrong, a lot of women couldn't breastfeed. And guess what? We didn't have pasteurization either. Can you imagine that? What I remember about our milk source, we'd go out there and milk the cows, and they'd swish their tails trying to tell us their indignation, stealing their milk. Then we would shoot the stream and hit them, and then we'd have a few flies on top of it. You should have seen Aunt Emma when she milked. She could make a stream, and I'm not kidding about that white. Strong,
Were you one of the people who'd have to milk the cows?
Huh?
Did you milk the cows yourself?
Yeah.
Twice a day?
Yeah. Usually it was the boys that did it, because we had a lot of chores in the house. But during threshing time, we did it, and other times too. And I think we milked up to 7 cows, I think, at a time. I think one time I milked all of them.
And would you make butter?
Yes, one of these barrels churn. Have you seen them? My sisters don't like milk. They don't like buttermilk. I do. I decided to be different. I think it's all in your head.
How many cows did you have altogether?
I say about 6 or 7 that we milked. And then they'd have calves, you know, and then you'd have a lot of milk for a while. And
My father described a cow that he had a close friendship with.
he had what?
He had a cow that he was close to.
I bet he did. We all had pets. Yeah, go ahead.
I can't remember anything else.
Didn't you have a favorite horse, Esther?
A favorite what?
Horse? Or is it Irene who had the favorite horse?
I think by the time Dad had thawed down a little bit, by the time the last 2 girls were born. Yeah, we had a favorite pony. She was a pony. We also had the big old workhorse, draft horses, you know, for farming. And the ones that I knew by the time I came along, they were all petted by all of us. I worked at my mother's uncle's place one summer when I was in my teens. And Aunt Lena was telling me about a horse, a child had gotten under the horse. And that horse was standing there just trembling for fear it would hurt her. You had more than just a human-animal relationship with everything on the farm, it seemed like.
And you had a lot of chickens?
I had a rooster that sat on my arm like I had here. I could feed him here. At first I didn't know it was the same one, but I got so I could identify him.
Did you ever have to eat him?
They did that when I didn't know it. And I got suspicious. You know, farmers' attitudes towards animals are different than city people's. I mean, they had a very practical or attitude towards them. I think you had to have to survive.
What was it like for you to become a city person?
What?
What was it like for you to become a city person?
A city person?
Yeah.
Well, I started doing that first when I went to nurses training, and I just was practically on campus all the time. I was used to hard work. I bet it was easier for me than a lot of my classmates, because I had worked in 6 homes during my teens. These were farm homes. Either the woman had had surgery or had some sickness where she had to watch her health, or she had threshers and extra people to feed and all that. But I was there during the school year. It was just on weekends, but in the summers, it was every day. I think I got just about a day off every other week, you know. And I was trying to figure out when I spent my first money. I never spent money. I remember one time Mom gave one of the aunts, because they drove, Mom didn't, they gave one of the aunts some eggs to sell so that we could each spend a dime. And I wanted a ring the worst way. What did I know, you know, dime, ring. And Aunt Minna talked me out of it. She talked me into buying it was like a cover to a dresser or something decorative, you know, and crocheted around. She taught me to crochet and all that stuff. And she even had a hem stitch. She spent more money on that than the original dime. No, we just, and I don't think I ever spent I don't know if I ever spent any more than that dime before I went into nursing. We turned the money in to help the family. It was just expected, you know. Besides, stores were 20 miles away.
What would you do for entertainment?
Play table games or outdoor games as children. When we had guests or we went anywhere, that's what we did. It usually took us about all evening to thaw out, and when we thawed out, it's time to go home because we were so shy. And then we'd get kind of rowdy, and Dad would come and try to shush us up for a few minutes. And the minute he turned his back on us, we'd get the giggles, you know. So it in its own way, it was a rich life. I think that's why this is so comfortable, is the relationships. Not that I had a lot of friends, I didn't. There were 2 girls in our church, I think they befriended me as a Christian duty. I used to laugh about it. It was our Christian duty to love me and include me.
Instead of just human empathy.
Huh?
Instead of just having human empathy.
Whatever. I belabored that long enough.
So you write poetry now, but you began writing poems even as a girl, right?
I had one that my English teacher insisted I send to a publisher. I was 17, I still have it. I don't know if my family even knows about it. My kids probably do. But when I think about it, it tells a lot about my thinking about life. Part of it is if I can see through death into eternity, then I indeed am free. That doesn't sound like a 17-year-old, does it?
A wise one.
No, I wasn't very wise. I can write poetry, but most of mine is prose. I write a yearly letter. Have I ever sent you one?
I love them.
That's kind of my mindset, I guess. The aunts and mother, they memorized just for the heck of it. They loved it. They were out there on the farm, you know. I think it was Herb was telling one time that Mom recited a poem, I don't know how many pages long. She just learned on her own.
Do you know what poets they liked?
Probably 18th century, 17th, 18th century, 19th century.
And would it be German poets or
Sometimes, yeah.
any British?
But they learned English too, and of course their folks couldn't help them in that. I think they were all reasonably capable in living, you know. Sometimes I thought some of them were a little simple, but I may be misjudging. But when I said I was going to go into nursing, I got nothing but negative feedback from the people that I had worked for and from my family. They just told me all the negative parts about nursing. So if I hadn't done it, I could blame nobody but myself, you know, because nobody else was. But what happened was I was working at my great uncle's, and he had an old Underwood typewriter. I think it was Underwood. And on the last day of December, I don't know what made me so determined, I wrote my application to get into nursing for the following June. And I didn't know, I think they knew what I was doing. I was typing out that, I didn't talk much at the time. I was a servant, you know. In March, I found out I was going to get in. And then when I bought my first pair of white stockings, that was a cincher. You know, just some kind of omen, I guess. I love nursing. I didn't expect it to be easy. Julie got her nursing degree a couple of years ago. Did you know that?
Hmm?
I said, Julie, why didn't it take? She says, Mom, it's so hard. John just became a nurse 10 years ago. I couldn't believe it. I said, John, why don't you get a profession somehow? And he sat there and looked at me and he said, well, if I'm going to do anything, I want to take nursing. I said, okay, I'll loan you the money interest-free and go for it. And then the monkey did something while he was in training. He was laid out of the program for a while, but they took him back in. I'm so glad. Before that, he had helped local people in church build houses and stuff, and things like that. But nothing like a profession he could get a hold of, I guess. So that's why I just about dropped when he said that. And then when Julie did it too, I thought that was odd. But music is her first love. She works for a, what do you call it, music organization. Conservatory.
Could you say more about why you love nursing?
I think I like people. I liked having a little bit of, although we were dependent to the school and all, you had a certain amount of independence in how you cared for people. And I took everything they taught, I took it so serious. One time when I was night supervisor, one of the sisters was a patient. She said, I thought you would never make it. And I felt like saying, I didn't think I would either. And later on, I was her supervisor. I gave it my all, and I told John 100%'s not enough. It's got to be 150. And I think he's living up to it.
You said there weren't a lot of choices for jobs for you at the time, not as many as there would be now.
Well, the other one was taking care of people in their homes or doing work for them. That would be a fourth one.
But if you were that age now, what do you think you would do?
Well, what I would do, I'm not familiar enough with that age.
Or like what jobs might, I don't know.
Oh, whether I would seek something else? I don't know. Teaching would have been good. I taught before I graduated. That was odd. You wouldn't do that now, I don't think. But I never could figure out why they chose me out of my class to do it. It was the obstetrics supervisor, and they were coming in with caudal anesthesia, and she'd rather be working with the patient and let me teach her class. First, she'd let me teach it, but she would grade it, or whatever. Then she decided I could grade it myself, but I had to show it to her. Then she decided not to even bother doing that. And there was 6 girls that came in the middle of the season. Nursing didn't always come at the same month class, It'd come in September, and maybe another class would be in June, or whenever they could get their needs met, I guess. And those girls did so well. They were smart. Then after I graduated, night supervisor, I taught again. Get up in the middle of my day and teach you. I don't know, I just loved it. It just felt something I wanted to do. What was funny, the minute I went to nursing school, when I'd come home to the country, to our church, people suddenly all were respectful. I don't know what that was about. I was still the same person. In fact, I had a person I had worked for as a maid, and when I came home after just being in school, not even graduate, she would practically get all upset and befuddled when she was around me. It's in their heads, it's not what you are. Same thing happened in Beatrice. There was a woman, most hospitals, or pretty much all hospitals, have these associations that do things for the hospital. What do you call them? I remember a woman there next to me, and she was actually shaking, and I thought, this is crazy. What's in your head?
She was shaking?
Huh? Yeah, she was so impressed. I don't know. The whole outlook of life was not like it is now. You didn't have half the exposure. But I always thought that was crazy. And I thought, do I do that too? Kind of tiptoe around certain people?
What do you mean by exposure?
Huh?
Exposure. You said you don't have half the exposure.
Education,
Oh, okay.
your environment. I mean, at least through machinery, you know, if not in person. You're aware of a lot of stuff that didn't enter our heads. Ministers were not always educated. Teachers, you could teach if you had 2 years of junior college. I don't know what it took to become a bona fide secretary. I know Louise went to junior college. As did your dad. That's when he kind of ran into it with our dad, because your dad didn't apply himself in high school. He just kind of played around. He actually is my favorite brother. Of course, we were right next to each other in age.
And you would visit him in prison, right?
What?
You would visit
We
your
did
bro-
one
your-
time. We
your
did one
brother
time, and
Walt?
you know, we did one time just because I corresponded with him. He could bank on me answering his letters. I think that was the only reason. And Mom and I went there one time for a visit, which were very sporadic. You know how the rules are. And one time when we went to visit him, they moved the hotel on the other corner. I lost my directions. It's eerie. We have people in our church that have been going there for 20 years. They still don't know which is the east side. I guess I was like that.
And would you meet with him inside the prison, or was there a
Yeah,
special?
there must have been a holding area. I'm trying to think whether he had to stay behind a wall or not.
But your mother'd be with you when you did that?
Yeah,
It was
I
both of
must
you?
have driven, I guess. I don't know. See, what year was that?
In the early 1940s, right? It was during World War II?
You know what was funny? He'd come home. He would say black was white if he felt like it. What was I going to tell you? I mean, he would argue that way, with tongue in cheek, of course. But
You said he would come home.
huh?
He would come home. You said he would come home doing that.
Yeah, come home and argue.
I lost it. I'll get it next week. I'll remember. Oh, I think life is just plain education. And the first year at the mercy of a lot of adults and semi-adults and good people and crazy people. After a while, you have to choose. And you can't blame that on anybody. You have to work with what you have. I know some of my siblings, they felt like they didn't have a fair deal. And they let it affect them all their lives. And it wasn't very pretty sometimes because it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair to whoever they were opposing, you know. So.
Well, it's been just about an hour, Esther. So maybe we should take a break and we could do another one of these after we let you have some
Do you
water
find
or
it
rest.
interesting?
Fascinating. Yeah.
I feel like sometimes I go off half-cocked.
Well, we enjoy it.